Constituent Assembly had to function through several limitations. It had to suffer a lot of problems. In this section, we shall make an overview of the role of the Constituent Assembly and evaluate, make a critical evaluation of the formation of the Constituent Assembly and its role in framing the Constitution of India. The Constituent Assembly started its work. The leaders or framers of the Constitution, they had several things in mind. First, they had to ensure the unity between different caste, creed, religion, especially religion, and others. Second, the dispute, confrontation between Congress and Muslim League leaders, their failure to reconcile, and following that, the consequent partition of India, that had an impact on independent India too. All these things were to be kept in mind. Along with these communal tensions and other divisions and sectorial controversies, there was transfer of power. Along with this transfer of power, transfer of population, that is, following division of India into India and Pakistan, transfer of population, it was a very serious concern for the Indian leaders. However, with all these limitations, Constitution was finally drafted, and we know that draft Constitution was adopted on November 26, 1949. Indian Constitution started with 395 articles in 22 parts and 8 schedules. It consists of almost 80,000 words and took 2 years, 11 months, 18 days to be reconstituted. The Constitution, it has gone through several amendments. Why this Constitution had to have so much of amendments? To analyze this thing, we need to have a look in the functioning of the Constituent Assembly. First of all, the Constituent Assembly was formed under the auspices of the Cabinet Mission. This Cabinet Mission actually was the British creation of British rule. It was colonial in nature. So the question arose whether this Cabinet Mission could overcome the colonial legacies for the Indian Constitution makers. Now, this Cabinet Mission plan actually was eager to create a balance of power between Congress and the Muslim League. It laid stress more on creating balance in terms of distribution of power in between two warring parties. It hardly highlighted or focused on Indian indigenous problems, its society, its economy, its polity. It was hardly addressed by Cabinet Mission plan. So, Indian Constitution had to go through these guidelines of Cabinet Mission, and it hardly could get rid of British legacies or British system of governance. Further, it is often criticized as a patchwork. Professor D.D. Basu, legal expert in the constitutional aspects, he said that it is an excellent patchwork. How it is a patchwork? Now, India is a parliamentary government. It derived its parliamentary form of government from Westminster model. That is, it almost imitated the British one. What is the advantage of Britain in having a parliamentary government? It is well organized. It has well organized party system. It is nurturing parliamentary maturity from a long time, right from 1688, following Glorious Revolution, which was to be imposed on India in the year 1947, or better to say in the year 1950, when Constitution came into effect. Now, a system which was enough matured, enough grown up in United Kingdom was just superimposed on Indian system. Maybe there was no other option, because Indian leaders also were very much familiar with this British system. It was also so because most of the leaders who were responsible for framing the constitution for India were fortunate enough to have Western education as their background. So they were enriched with the thought process of Western liberalism, British liberalism, which guided them to incorporate rights and liberty, concept of liberty for the indigenous people. Now, India is a multinational country. It is geographically is wide enough, which actually doesn't match with British situation. So, what framers of Indian Constitution did? They adopted the model of federal form of government from USA. USA also is a multinational state. So, India accepted that part of governance from USA. As a vision, things are very clear. But what happened? Reconciliation between parliamentary form of government and federal form of government itself is contradictory. Why? Parliamentary form of government suggests that there is a fusion of power. How this fusion occurs? Now, once the party which gets majority in the parliament, that is the representative house of the parliament, forms the government, that party becomes the dominant factor in the executive too. So there is a fusion. The party in majority in the parliament forms the government that is leading the executive. So there is no scope for dividing or separating the power between the parliament and the executive. Whereas in USA, it is having a presidential form of government with complete separation of power. The separation of power, or I shouldn't say complete, nearly complete separation of power. The separation of power which was actually taken from Montesquieu's version. It was an European concept taken by the framers of the Constitution in USA. In USA, there is nearly complete separation of power between the legislature and the executive. So, reconciliation in between these two is itself a very difficult task, and it can create lot of anomalies. Further, the Constituent Assembly, which represented mostly the Congress leaders, even if women leaders were there, if we look at the biographies of these women leaders, they were all educated in Western culture. So, West had a very specific impact on the framing of the Constitution. Secondly, it is not only a patchwork, it hardly could overcome colonial legacy. Why couldn't overcome colonial legacy? Because it was overwhelmed with the British form of governance. We have a republic, we have our president as the head of the state, but as a norm of the parliamentary system of government, he is a constitutional or titular head, not exactly alike British crown, yet the president is more or less like the British crown. What is the difference? Crown is the hereditary post, president is indirectly elected. Now, assimilation of these two has always been a problem for the future leaders of India. Next, we can say that in the preamble, we have declared that we, the people of India, having solemnly resolved such and such to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. When it started, the word socialist was not there, secular was not there. After 42nd Amendment, it was incorporated. Anyway, we, the people of India, have created it, have resolved to adopt it, and finally, we have let this constitution to come into effect. Now, to what extent we were there? If we look back at the elections, I have already told that 82% representation was from Congress. Okay, people can say, critics can say, these leaders were elected. Let's look back at the election process. As per the provisions of 1935 Government Act, who were eligible for electing their representatives? Were they poor? Were they peasants? Were they workers? Were they Dalits, subalterns? No. A statistics suggested that only 14% of the vote, if we take it as an authentic statistical document, only 14% of the people did cast their vote. So what about the rest of 86% of the population which would vote for future government to come in and for which the government is supposed to work? So how can we claim that it was the creation by the majority of the people? It was not so. Now, to do justice with the leaders of the Indian National Congress and Indian nationalist movements, it was also true that it was perhaps not possible to conduct direct election during that period. There was communal violences, there was nationalist struggles, and there were British people who were not eager to hand over power. They were just in their attempt to find out various avenues so that transfer of power is being delayed. Lots of constraints were there. Along with this, there were constraints of time and money. So direct election could not be conducted. So we had to depend on indirect election. That is, no universal adult franchise was could be taken. We had to depend on indirect election, and this indirect election, only 14% of the population could cast their vote. So it was exactly not people's constitution. It was not exactly the constitution written by the people, but however, perhaps it was the best possible option during that period. Several discussions were held. Several things were published in newspaper. On many issues, people were invited to share their views. Now think of India in the year 1947. There were illiterate people. Most of them were illiterate. They were ignorant. Okay, they were alert about their exploitation. They were hopeful that a government in independent India would come and rescue them from these exploitations, oppressions, and miseries of their life. But were they able to give their views in these public debates, in these public discussions? Were they able to go through the newspapers, listen to other media transmissions? No. So, deliberations, discussions, all these things were initiated by the upper middle class, at base the middle class. So, majority of the Indian population were left aside. No constitutional discourse was there which took into consideration the actual demand of the people, which could throw light on the realities of life and miseries of the people. Further, there was another thing allied with this. Many of the members of this Constituent Assembly had legal background. I have already talked about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, B.N. Rao, the constitutional advisor to the Government of India, who prepared a series of background papers, and the other was Chief Draftsman S.N. Mukherjee. Actually, it is often criticized that S.N. Mukherjee has drafted the constitution in a legal language. For incorporation of so many of legal experts has made our constitution an exhibit of excellent legal documentation. We have lots of social, economic, and other sorts of problems. We have our own culture. Take for example, Gandhiji suggested for Panchayati Raj, Gram Swaraj, self-rule, and so on, because he was the grassroots leader. But the framers of the constitution incorporated all these things in part 4 of the constitution. Part 4 of the constitution, it is named as Directive Principles of the Constitution. What is its main feature, key feature? It is not mandatory for the government to implement these things. It is true, through several amendments, situation has changed. Supreme Court has given its verdict that even if it clashes with fundamental rights, directive principles should be given primacy. But what our constitution suggested, these particular things must be written, enumerated in the part 4 of the constitution, which is a non-justiciable part of the constitution. That is, it is not mandatory for the government to implement these things. Now, we went for, in the first planning, we went for development of agriculture. In the second planning, our government laid stress more on heavy industries. Later on, we realized that we should have gone for labor-intensive development mode, not exactly the capital-intensive ones. Gandhiji realized it because he was a grassroots leader. But framers of our constitution, from their middle class, upper middle class background, they hardly could look through the situations, the reality of the situation which prevails in the villages, in the rural sectors, or the lower ladders of the urban sector. Therefore, the constitution remained as an excellent legal document, not exactly the reflection of our socio-economic aspirations. It has always been criticized, I have already told it, it has always been criticized as a Congress document. Congress has always incorporated different ideologies, different visions within the same platform. It is true. But Congress was the only voice India could hear during that period. So, the visions, values, ideologies, principles of Congress, they were highlighted in the constitutional documentation. Later on, perhaps, with the course of time, it didn't match with the real situation of India, and therefore the constitution had to be amended several times. Thus, this Constituent Assembly gave us a constitution. We are proud to have our constitution. It was an excellent work, undoubtedly, but it hardly could consider or failed to consider many aspects which are still problem areas for Indian political situation. And last but not the least, for all these things, Constitution has been left with some constitutional anomalies. And these anomalies are to be removed as soon as possible so that we can go for a better India in future. And perhaps we have to revise the constitution following some of the schemes of Venkatacharya Commission. Several times, different commissions and committees were constructed, like Rajamannar Committee, Sarkoria Commission, and latest Venkatacharya Commission. They have suggested more decentralization of power, more reconstruction of power, more they have pointed out several anomalies. The present leaders of India need to go through all these recommendations and have to accompany or incorporate all these recommendations by convening a common platform where all the parties with different ideologies as well as the constitutional experts will take seat and will have a wide discussion, and these must be sent for referendum to different states of the nation.